Hi everybody, it's Thorn, and I just got a question from a coworker, actually, of all people, and it suddenly occurred to me, oh my gosh, I've never made this video. It's time to make this video. So I apologize, I'm a little bit unkempt. There's no planning involved. I just ran upstairs and grabbed some things and thought I'd roll with it. So my coworker sent me an email, and she said, hey, my daughter is 12. She's expressed an interest in witchcraft. I want to support her. What books can I get for her? And I thought, yes, if I have a mission at all in service of the Dark Lord, it is to bring children to the fold. No, I'm totally kidding. Okay. Presumably, if you're watching this video, it's because you're supportive of your child's interests. So this is not me trying to persuade you that it's okay for your kid to explore witchcraft, Wicca, paganism, magic, etc. I'm not a parent, okay, but I am formerly an educator. I spent 5 years in elementary and high schools working with children primarily between the ages of 12 and 17. And anyway, I've done a lot of professional work with children. I am a licensed teacher in my state in English and in history. So that's where I'm coming from with these recommendations, is working with children and literacy. So caveat number one is I'm assuming that you're already on board. You're just like, yes, somebody point me in a direction. I had another caveat, but I don't remember what it was because I'm really excited to just start talking about books. Oh yes, caveat number two. Only you know where your child is in terms of their reading, so I'll leave that up to your discretion. The reality is that in 2020 there are not a ton of books that are especially aimed at preteens, teens, and especially younger. There are a couple on the market, and there are several available that were published between like 98 and 2005. So there are absolutely books out there, but given how the climate has changed, some of those books may or may not still be appropriate. So use your best judgment. Third caveat, my experienced witches who might have lots and lots of feelings, this video really isn't for you. I'm interested in your input, but keeping in mind that like we're talking about children, so there really only is... There's certain things that we should prioritize focusing on, right? Like most of the books that I'm going to suggest here are imperfect because that is the nature of books. They're not going to include Ronald Hutton level scrutiny in terms of history, so we're just going to have to be okay with that because we're talking about 12-year-olds, okay? And even brilliant 12-year-olds usually don't have the inclination towards that sort of thing. So I decided to kind of put that priority at the bottom. So all that said, here are some books for you to think about. I'm going to start with one that's kind of an oldie. It's been a couple of years since I've reread it, okay, but I think of it really fondly. I read it as a young adult. I was probably, I don't know, 18 or 19, so older than the intended audience. So grain of salt right there. And that is Where to Park Your Broomstick by Lauren Manoy. This is... Specifically, this was published in a time when Wicca and witchcraft as terms were largely used interchangeably. So the subtitle here is A Teen's Guide to Witchcraft. It's very much focused on a particular style of witchcraft called Wicca. You'll run into that as you explore books. People often use the terms interchangeably, but they're not automatically interchangeable. Your youngster probably won't care at this point, okay, but it could confuse them later if this is something that they pursue. And what I really like about this book is that it is friendly and approachable. It has a lot of the material that books from this era were known for. So it's got lots of stuff about different traditions, and it's got kind of like the sexy history about like why witchcraft is so cool. And some of the history is a little bit like, well, we know more now. So they might want to supplement their reading as they get older. But it's very approachable text. It's lightly illustrated. So as you can see, like it is text heavy, okay? But the Lexile level is comparatively lower than books aimed at adults. It also has, I really like this, it has little blocks of excerpts from other teenagers, so you get this window into what other youngsters are up to. I think that's really cool. I really liked that sort of thing when I was a kid. It always helped to feel like I was hearing from other young witches, especially because this was before social media. Lots of really simple things. It takes into account, like, hey, kids don't necessarily have a lot of stuff, right? Like, they're not going to go to an occult store and buy an athame, right? So it takes into account the resources available to most kiddos. Anyway, it's friendly and approachable. The information is pretty solid, and it's a fun read from a really encouraging and engaging author. This one is still in print. You'll probably have to get it on Amazon. I don't think I've seen it at a bookstore in, I don't know, 15 years, but it's a goodie. The second one is Teen Spirit Wicca by David Salisbury. David Salisbury is a well-established and well-respected writer in witchcraft communities, active right now. He's got a number of books available. This is one of his earlier ones. Again, as in the title, this one specifically focuses on Wicca. If your child has told you that they're interested in witchcraft and they haven't specified Wicca, maybe it's because they don't know there are types of witchcrafts, or maybe they're more educated than I think they are and they're being very specific. They're not interested in Wicca. So that might be something worth asking them. But if they express an interest specifically in Wicca, this is a great one. What I love about this book is that the history is probably the best of all of the books that I'm going to show you, and he hits you with it right to begin with. So he kind of breaks down like where Wicca comes from, other traditions it's related to. He dispels some of the myths kind of right away. And again, very approachable writer. It is text heavy. This book isn't illustrated at all. So again, like probably a slightly higher Lexile level than the Manoy book I was just showing you. But good stuff. Lots of good exercises, and again, taking into account that teens often don't have the resources that adults do. There's lots of spells that I think are of particular interest to young people. So there's stuff for them to try right away, which is really fun. This is another one you'll probably have to order. It's on, oh, I thought it was Moon Books. It's on Soul Rocks. Anyway, this is another one. The next one I want to talk about is my own darling that I want to kind of recommend with some caveats, okay? So this is Teen Witch by Silver RavenWolf, and I know that some of my more experienced older witches in the audience right now are cringing a little bit, okay, but let me hear me out. So I think Teen Witch actually holds up a lot better than a lot of the books that came out at this time, and it's on my list because it's still one of the very few that is specifically aimed at kids. There are lots of better intro books about both Wicca and witchcraft. Again, this is a Wicca-centric book. There are absolutely better books available on the market today, given that we know more about history, kind of our collective witchcraft culture has changed a little bit. Actually, it's changed a lot. But Silver RavenWolf's tone and her accessibility, I still think is unmatched in other places. So even though there are points in the book where I'm just like, maybe not so much, like actually that history is pretty bad, or I'm not sure I'd phrase it that way if I was writing it myself. The reason it's on this list, you might purchase it as a supplement to another book. The reason it's on this list is because I love the spells. And I think the spells are especially appropriate for preteens and younger teens. It addresses a lot of the things that kids tend to be anxious about and interested in. Problems with teachers or bullies or, crushes. I don't know, just kind of stuff that might seem goofy to a 17-year-old, but could be really important to your 11 or 12-year-old. Again, I don't think her tone can be beaten. It's also a much easier book to read, I think, in terms of Lexile level, than some of the others on this list. Lots of good like correspondence lists, lots of chants and rituals that are built in that kids can do right off the bat. And it's got some warnings in it too that, again, adult witches are going to cringe. Like there's a section in here about how alcohol should never be mixed with magic, okay? And like clearly that's in there because this book is aimed at children. Like adult witches use alcohol, they use intoxicants, like, you know, adult witches do whatever they want because they're adults. But, you know, if I were writing a book for children, I'd probably tell them not to drink too. So I think that's reasonable. Anyway, flip through this one on your own. There's a convenience section in the beginning for parents. It's not really necessarily aimed, I think, at the supportive parent. Presumably you're here watching this video because you're supportive. This was published in an era where there was a lot of material out there about how witches were satanic and evil, so Silver RavenWolf felt the need to address that stuff right away. Books today don't tend to do that because we don't have to. The next 3 books are aimed at adults, but I picked them for a variety of reasons. The first is The Real Witch's Handbook by Kate West. Again, this is another older book. So like the history is a little like not awesome, but it's engaging. At least it'll be exciting for a young person. This one is also just really approachable. It's focused on Wicca despite its title. And don't worry, I've got a couple more general books about witchcraft coming up here. But the fact of the matter is that a lot of what's on the shelf right now that's aimed at kids or could be appropriate for kids is very much focused on one specific tradition of witchcraft. So, you know, it's hard to write, I think, a young person's guide to traditional witchcraft, right? Going down to the crossroads to do whatnot. Like, that'd be a little bit tough, right? Lee Morgan's guide to bringing your child to anyway. So again, Kate West is super approachable. This has a really nice discussion about holidays, and I really love the section on divination. Like there's lots of stuff here about like how to use a pendulum and how to use runes and kind of the fun stuff that I think gets youngsters engaged right away. It's accessible without being condescending. I mean, this is a favorite book of a lot of adults who came of age in the 90s and 2000s. So this is another one I would check out. Kate West is also particularly popular in the UK, so if you're a parent in the UK, you might have an easier time finding this book. They're all available on Amazon, right? So the next 2 books are aimed at adults, but I picked them because they're awesome, and I know that I would have freaked out if I was 12 and somebody had bought them for me. The first one is Modern Witch by Devin Hunter, and the reason it's on this book, the reason it's on this list, is because it's hyper illustrated, and Devin took all these pictures himself because he's a badass. But I love, this is a very general book. It doesn't focus on a specific tradition. The premise is kind of like, hey, witchcraft is this creative act that you can engage with consciously and make choices for your own practice. Here's how you do it. It's very practical. So like there's a chapter about using crystals, and there are chapters about plants. And so a book like this, if a young person were to read the first couple of pages of introduction, like, hey, this is what witchcraft is, this is where it comes from, this is, you know, the aim of this book, they could really just kind of flip through it, you know, according to their druthers and pick the thing that was engaging. There's lots of spells, and there's lots of ideas for coming up with things for yourself. I just know that if I were 12 and somebody had given me this book, I would have kept it in my backpack and carried it with me everywhere, and I would have been obsessed with the pictures, and I probably would have written down all of the spells in my little book of shadows for myself. Yeah, just like, so a lot of the text might be, you know, you be the judge of your own child, okay? Like, I'm skimming through the text, and like some of the vocabulary I think is going to be a little bit advanced. But if your kiddo is particularly astute, I mean, hey, use it as SAT prep, okay? So, this is one I would check out. I think that this would engage a youngster right away. And obviously adults too. Like, this is intended for adults. This might be a good one for yourself too, parent, if you're interested in seeing, you know, what this stuff is all about. The second book I put on for the same premise. This is Anjou Kiernan's Ultimate Guide to Witchcraft. Again, heavily illustrated, lots of great photos. This one has different information than Modern Witch. Modern Witch is really focused on workings and spells and kind of the practicality of witchcraft. Kiernan's book, I think, is a little bit more comprehensive in the sense that there's more time spent discussing, I guess, like history and traditions. It's a little bit broader in that sense. So this would be another good one. Again, lots of spells. It's very engaging. I feel like I'm making it sound like kids are dumb and they need lots of pictures, and that's not true. Except they do like lots of pictures. That's just true. So this would be another good one to check out. Tarot reading. Again, lots of divination, spirit and animal guides, like stuff that isn't specific to particular traditions, but could still be really engaging for a young person. So that's what I came up with in my 5-minute flurry of running up the stairs, trying to answer my coworker's email. I do know, I want to say it's Nikki Vanderkar. I'm probably A, wrong, and B, saying her name wrong. But I believe she just came out with a young person's guide to witchcraft that's aimed at preteens. I haven't read it, so I can't recommend it one way or the other. But that might be something worth looking at. There are other books available. There are books that are aimed specifically at teens and children. So I'd say, like, use your best judgment. These are the ones that I like. I mean, I'd probably get my kids several books because realistically, like, again, you know your child. Kids like to go through multiple books, right? Like, they're less likely to sit down and read a whole book, like, in an afternoon and then move on to a second book. Like, I think about my own habits as a child, and, like, I would go to the library and just take out everything, right? And then just, like, manically flip through all of it. So use your own knowledge of your kid to make that choice. All of these should be supplemented with other things eventually. And of course, if their interest flourishes and they go on to read more material, there's lots of much better stuff out there in terms of, like, history and traditions and some of the stuff that's a little bit drier and more likely to be over a child's head. But again, you know your own kid. Anyway, that's all. I'd welcome, obviously, other input in the comments from others, especially pagan parents and witch parents. So hope you're all well, and I will see you next time.